Your hosts are here, Sammie and Michelle. By the end of this podcast, you'll know them well. Adulting, navigating the journey of life. Careers to relationships, pain and strife. Put down the rule book, rethink the status quo. If there's another direction you wanna go, find purpose, passion and mastery in all that you do with Status Post Adulting.
Hey, Status Post Adulting fam! This is Sammie
and Michelle,
and you're listening to the 51st episode of Status Post Adulting, where we are going to be talking about budgeting. But first, let me check in with my co-host Michelle. How are you doing, Michelle?
I am doing great, Sammie. Really excited. A few people sent us their dating app information after last week's episode, which I realized is super fun because I also just love seeing the people I know in their best light. Like, people put together these wonderful profiles for themselves and then they share with strangers. And it's like, wait, I love you and I want to see your best photos and your funny little quips and stuff. So that was really fun.
That is a good point, Michelle. I think dating profile photos will be like those photos you see of your grandmother when she was like 17 or 18 years old or whatever. Like the one photo that they take. It's going to be like that for like the future generations. They'll be like, oh my God, Grandma, can I see your dating profile? And they'll be like, haha, you were so cute and witty.
Not that we can relate. We have like zero photos of our grandparents when they were younger.
That's true.
And in absolutely no related terms, we are talking about budgeting today, which I'm really excited, Sammie. I think with the new year, if you're listening to this when it comes out on Tuesday, it's a perfect time to think about your finances and your money goals, and budgeting is like a really great way to set yourself up very intentionally about how you're going to spend your money throughout the year.
So true, Michelle. Budgeting is a great topic because it's really about taking control of your money. And as a controlling person, that is super fun for me. I like how YNAB, that is You Need a Budget, the app, YNAB, You Need a Budget, they define budgeting as assigning a job to every dollar. And I really love that because that's like a new take on budgeting. You're not just like planning out where you're going to spend your money. It's like you earned each one of these hard-working dollars. Where are they going to go?
Put them to work.
Put them to work for you, ideally, but also to pay some of your bills because that's probably somewhere that they're going to have to go to.
I agree, Sammie. An important distinction to make is budgeting versus tracking your spending. Tracking your spending is when you are looking back at the money you spent objectively and seeing what categories you're spending the most on, taking a look and seeing where your money is going, and really educating yourself about where every dollar is going. Budgeting is about taking that information, looking to the future, and like you said, assigning a spot for every dollar.
That's a great way to explain it, Michelle. Budgeting is all about future planning, versus tracking your spending is more seeing what happened in the past. It's data collection. And data is super important. It's going to be super important to budgeting, as we'll talk about, but it's not the same as budgeting. A lot of times I'll hear people say things like, oh yeah, I budget, I use Mint. Mint is an app which like literally tells you everything you've spent your money on, but it doesn't tell you how you're going to spend your money. So that's the difference between tracking your spending versus budgeting.
Exactly, Sammie. And only you can say where your money goes. I would say the perfect budget, you would have every expense accounted for. You would know and be able to allocate money to every random spending that you'd have, every category. And that's really great. There are people who do this and they're able to really get down to the details about how they're spending their money. And so we're going to talk about budgeting, and you can do it perfect. You can start easy, whatever makes the most sense for you in your situation.
Yeah, Michelle, that perfect budget literally knows exactly where every dollar is going to go. And that's not necessarily easy to do, but at some points in time, it may be worth doing. Or if you just like to do that, that's also a great thing to do. I know I kept a budget like that when I was living in North Carolina and planning on moving to California to be with you, my lovely sister. I knew that I needed at least $5,000 to get here because between the plane ticket and all these things, and at that time, it's not like I was making as much money as I am now. I had to be more diligent about where I spent in order to save up that $5,000. So I would literally plan out, like, this is what I'm going to spend on food. This is what I'm going to spend on eating out. And based off of that, if something went awry and I accidentally spent too much on groceries and I knew I had to detract from another category, and it was very, very controlled, but at the same time, really effective in getting me to save that $5,000 so I could feel comfortable moving to California.
That's a great example, Sammie, because I think budgets have a place at every season of your life. When you are starting out, when you are starting to make money, your expenses might be tight and that sort of thing. And you want to be able to make sure that you have enough month over month. And so budgeting really helps you reach your goals. As you start to make money and you have a little bit of excess, it's also nice to budget because, one, you want to make sure that you don't unnaturally inflate because you're not thinking about where your money is going. And also, as you're getting more money, you can start to think, okay, I'm getting a little bit of extra money this month. Where should I put it? And it's nice to have a plan for that instead of thinking, ooh, I got a big check this week. Maybe now it's time for something fun for me.
Exactly, Michelle. That's very true. For example, when I was poorly spending all my money, my main determinant in deciding whether I could spend on big purchase items or not is how much do I have in the checking account, which is not a great way to organize your money.
Exactly, Sammie. So when it comes to organizing your budget, we wanted to outline a couple of things that you should be thinking about. The first thing you want to be thinking about is your income and the money that you're bringing in. And so it's important to know how much that is so that you can have a starting place as far as allocating your dollars.
Exactly, Michelle. And for some people, that's super easy. They get paid the same amount every month. For some people, that's a little bit more tricky, and they may actually even have to adjust over time because their income can be variable month to month. But it is a good idea to have a general idea of how much money you bring in each month after taxes.
Yeah, Sammie, that specifically applied to me when I was working in sales because I would get paid my base salary consistently, but would get commissions and bonuses irregularly. And so part of my income was consistent, but the other half was a lot more variable.
That's a great example, Michelle. And then the next thing to consider is expenses. When it comes to expenses, I like to think of them as your regular expenses, which I call my regularly regular expenses. And then I have my regularly irregular expenses. Those of you guys who are in medicine, this may sound familiar to some heart rhythms, and I apply the same concept to budgeting. So for my regularly regular bills, I include things like my bills, like rent, car insurance, student loans, things that come every single month.
Utilities, water, all the things that more or less are predictable, even if there is a little bit of variability in some of the utilities.
Yes, and if you have recurring subscriptions, Audible, Spotify that come every month, I also include these in my regularly regular expenses. For me, I like to write down what all my regularly regular expenses are, and I like to write down how much they cost me monthly, how much they cost me annually, and the date that bill comes in. This is for a couple of reasons. One, it kind of puts all the regularly regular expenses on the same playing field. Like I'm not having to think like, oh, well, this is billed this much annually versus this expense is monthly. I can see them all together. Like this is how much it is a month. This is how much it is a year. And then the dates, that's great for, especially if you try to keep just like the right amount in your checking account to pay your bills. That kind of helps you know like at what time of the month about how much you should have in your checking account. And then another thing I include is which type of payment method I use to pay for that. Which credit card, which bank account does it come from? The main reason for that is because if something happens to my bank account, if there's like a fraud or something like that, I can immediately go to that list and be like, okay, these are the different accounts that I have to go to and change the billing information for, and it's pretty easy to adjust.
Yeah, Sammie, I do mine a little bit more simple. I prefer to know monthly what my bills are so that I can track them month over month, see if there's any changes that I should be aware of. Like you said, fraudulent charges, or even sometimes my water bill is high, my electricity is high, something seems a little off, and I'll be able to flag that because I know, hey, this is how much I typically spend on this a month. I'd also say I love to set up text alert whenever I can, because in an ideal world, I personally like to have as many of my things come out of my credit card as possible because I pay my credit card off every month and I like to get the points. But a lot of bills you do get fined if you pay via credit card. So I do that over my checking accounts. And I don't want to accidentally have money getting pulled out automatically from my checking account without knowing it because I do have everything on auto pay. So having that text reminder helps so much because I'm like, oh, let me do a quick check and make sure all the money to pay my bills is where they need to be.
Exactly, Michelle. And then my next category of spending for my expenses is regularly irregular. These are things that always happen, but maybe not on that typical, like perfectly monthly or perfectly annual schedule. For me, I include things like oil changes, renewing my license, vehicle registration. I even include things like getting glasses or recurring or routine medical expenses, like if you have to pay a copay for a physical or a copay for a pap smear. Those things get included on here so that way you kind of have an idea of like what feel like random expenses, but they're not actually random. One thing that YNAB always likes to say is, Christmas is a surprise that comes every year. And I hear Dave Ramsey say that too. It's like, we act like, oh my God, I spent so much during Christmas. And it's like, every year there's Christmas. So why is it such a surprise?
I agree with that, Sammie. I saw Seti wants to either tweet it or email about setting money aside for quote unquote unpredictable expenses, like say like a speeding ticket, if you know you have an issue with those things. For example, for me, while it's not in my budget per se, because I do travel to San Francisco a lot and I park in San Francisco and they're pretty nasty about their parking fees. I've been lucky so far, knock on wood, but I have $100 just set aside so that I know that if I get that random ticket, I like won't cry immediately because I'll be like, okay, this sucks, but I knew there was a chance of this because people in the city love giving parking tickets. And yeah, it just gives me a little bit of peace of mind because otherwise having like a random $100 bill pop up is not fun at all.
That's a good example, Michelle. As someone who had to park in San Francisco for years, literally, the tickets, it's a whole other algorithm to learn. Like, I don't know how people just like go to San Francisco for like one day and park and like get everything right because there's just so much to know to park correctly and move your car on time and all the little loopholes for moving your car. It's just too much. So yes, I like that idea of setting some money aside for those tickets in particular.
Exactly, Sammie. And then another thing to start to categorize within your budget is other cost. How much are you spending on groceries, eating out, skincare, waxes, threading, travel? These less consistent expenses that you might want to plan ahead for and categorize, but they're not necessarily within your bills, your subscriptions, costs that you know are for sure going to happen every single month.
Yeah, Michelle. And I would call these just straight up irregular expenses. Technically, there could be a pattern to them. Over, years or many months, you can kind of start to gauge that pattern. I definitely recommend learning yourself, but they're not as strict or as typical as like your vehicle registration or your rent. They're a little bit more irregular, so I just call those straight up irregular expenses. And Michelle, I did want to talk a little bit about budgeting goals because everybody's going to have different goals or multiple goals with their budget, and it also changes over time. For example, when I was moving from North Carolina to California, my primary budgeting goal was to save $5,000 so I could easily move from North Carolina to California. Other people may have goals that are centered around paying off different debts, student loan debt, credit card debt, those kind of things. Some people may have goals for saving up for a car or saving up for different types of vacations. And then other goals might be like the goal is simply to save greater than 50% of your income or invest greater than 50% of your income. I think regardless of whatever position you're in, I think having a goal for your savings rate, like your savings percentage, is a good thing to keep in mind because it puts that focus on always thinking about your future self.
I agree, Sammie. I think other potential goals for budgeting as well can be bringing down your expenses. So maybe you want to see how much you're spending on something like groceries. And once you see that amount, you're like, okay, I'm spending a ton on groceries. Maybe there are changes I could make to save more money. Or I'm spending so much time eating out. I don't necessarily see that aligning with my values. I want to eat out less so that I can save money. And so budgeting is really great for that too, because you can take a look and say, hey, here are some of my hot spots in terms of spending. Where do I want to make changes so that I can save a little bit more?
Definitely, Michelle. And I know like before you create the budget, a lot of times the budget itself feels like such like a deprivation type thing. But like really once you get into it, it's about being honest with yourself and it becomes like a gamification thing. It becomes like kind of fun to be frugal because you're always trying to like see like, okay, this is how much I generally spend on food. But if I do this, I can actually make my food cheaper for the week or the month. And it's funny because people like once they know that you enjoy being frugal, they give you all kinds of tips. Like people will always be recommending like coupons for me, or they'll be like, oh my gosh, you need to check out Safeway on Fridays because they have all the deals. And people get into it. People will even be like, hey, like I had like an extra package of chia seeds. I'm going to give it to you if you're cool with it. I'm like, yeah, like I eat chia seeds like 3 times a day. So like load that shit on me. People get into it with you and they know that you're super appreciative because you're tracking it and you're monitoring it. So you actually care.
Absolutely, Sammie. I think too with budgeting, a lot of times it seems stressful when you're not doing it. And what I notice with myself and when I talk to other people is I will start listing things. I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm eating out too much. I feel like I'm spending too much on gas. I feel. And then I look at how much I'm actually spending and maybe I am, maybe I'm not. But usually I feel a lot of guilt when I don't know, but it's because I don't know. Once I actually see the numbers, sometimes I need to have grace and say, okay, you went a little bit crazy on this last month. Let's try to reel it in this month. But a lot of times I'm actually not doing that bad. It's like other random things that I wasn't expecting that I'm happy to cut out that are the things that are driving up what I'm spending every month. So I agree. I think budgets are great for gamifying and trying to reach different goals when it comes to your spending. It helps people when it comes to knowing you're saving money and being able to give you coupons and stuff. And then just takes away some of your guilt. Like I think a lot of times we're really hard on ourselves. We assume we're these like crazy, wasteful people. And maybe we have seasons of that, but a lot of times it's not as bad as we think it is.
That's so true, Michelle. And speaking of me and Michelle's budgeting, to be honest, we're not the perfect budget type of people. Every dollar that I have doesn't have a job. I'll be honest. You know, I have savings rate goals. I track my spending, but I'm not like looking at the month ahead and saying this much needs to go to groceries, this much needs to go to travel, etc. I would love to get on that level and I'm working towards it. But right now, the way I'm tracking things, that's just not how I budget. And we know some of you guys might be the type who really want to get super anal with the spending and you're going to do the true budget and that's awesome. And we know other people are like, okay, can you find like a way for me to do this without being so strict about it? Because realistically, I'm not going to do it.
I agree, Sammie. For me, I like to see where my money is going. I like to go back and track my spending for that peace of mind and use that to give me a rough idea of how I'm spending my money. But I don't hold myself to specific dollar amounts to certain things. I just try to make sure I'm staying under them and keeping track so that if I do go over budget or over what I typically spend, then I know it and I can reel it back in.
Exactly, Michelle. And like I said, I don't explicitly budget, but I do use some strategies to make sure that I'm putting away money towards savings. For example, my paycheck literally goes into like 6 different accounts. I have multiple savings accounts, which if you use certain banks, they don't charge you for additional savings accounts and they don't have minimum balances. I love the Capital One 360 savings account. This is not an advertisement for them, but they let you create as many savings accounts as you want. So I keep one that's like my emergency one. I keep one that is, I call it my new car fund, even though I hopefully never have to buy a new car because I love my Honda Fit to death. But if I did have to buy a new car, I keep a fund for that. I keep one for just general spending. And my paycheck will go like $300 to the emergency fund, $250 to the car fund. And it all gets put into different little boxes before I even really get to interact with the money. So it's a kind of a way for me to like manage my budget without me having to think about it.
Exactly, Sammie. I have a similar mindset. And I think it really varies too on your goals. When I'm paying down debt or or when I've had student loans in the past, then budgeting is really nice to be able to be like, okay, how can I save money? And then have a specific place I'm trying to put it, because obviously paying off debt is so important. And then I loosen it up a little bit when I'm just trying to be smart about my finances and trying to save and invest and leave a little bit of fun money for myself as well.
That's so true. And for me, Michelle, one of my big goals is to save and invest as much as possible. So aside from those savings accounts, I keep like a goal amount for my checking account, which is to pay those regular bills. And then anything that I have over, for me, it's $5,000. If I have anything over $5,000 in my checking account, I'll just take that and invest it. Once a week, I'll go into my account and I'll look, oh, I have $6,000 or $7,000 in my checking account. I'll take that extra $2,000. I'll just put it in investments. So that way there's no money that's really just like lying around and not doing anything. Like no money that didn't have a job, even though I didn't pick out that job for it ahead of time.
Exactly, Sammie. And I think part of that too, when it comes to budgeting, we talk about knowing what your income is. Obviously, there's the money that you get pre-tax and post-tax. So it's also great to budget for the year and think about how much you want to put in your tax advantage accounts, whether that's a 401k, a traditional or Roth IRA, or a 403b. We really believe you should be putting money into those type of accounts. And budgeting lets you know, hey, this is how much I want to put there. And it'll be taken out of my check a lot of times before I'm even seeing that paycheck.
Exactly, Michelle. For the 401k accounts or the pre-tax accounts, if you're looking to max it out, you can look at how much that is divided by your paychecks to max out your pre-tax account that way.
And when it comes to budgeting and tracking your spending, there are a lot of great tools out there, both paid and free. You can use something like YNAB that Sammie mentioned earlier. You can use Mint for tracking your spending. You can use Personal Capital. There are other ones out there as well. So sometimes that's an easy way to get in. I think I used Mint years ago. And then after a while, I was like, these categories aren't specific enough for me. And that's when I switched over to putting my spending into an Excel sheet. But it's super helpful when you want to just automate it.
That's true, Michelle. Things like YNAB, they literally help you assign a job to every dollar. So if you're looking for that super anal budget, like that's the way to go. Mint, it's more tracking your spending. There's other things like my Chase will tell me what categories I spent on. I think Bank of America does the same thing. So you can use those tools to kind of help you plan out a budget and also track your spending, which brings us back to tracking your spending. Yes, tracking your spending is about looking at the past. Budgeting is about looking at the future, but there really is no budgeting without tracking your spending. Tracking your spending, oh my God, it's my favorite thing. It's my favorite episode from all our episodes, and it is the thing that will tell you who you are. Tracking your spending will tell you what you love. It will tell you what you truly value. Tracking your spending takes everything to the next level. When you track your spending, you can see, okay, I actually spent this much on groceries last month. Once you do that for a few months, once you do that for years, you really know how much you actually spend on groceries. Whether it's like typically anywhere from like $100 to $300 a month or $1,000 to $2,000 a month, you have a real idea of how much you spend. And tracking your expenses also kind of helps you pick up those irregularly regular expenses so that you can add them to that list so you know, hey, oil changes happen every 3 to 6 months and you can prepare for that.
Definitely, Sammie. When I tried to budget before tracking my spending, I would have some outrageously low goals because I was completely unrealistic about how much money I was spending on things. And of course, I couldn't stick to it because if you're trying to take your budget for something from like $500 to $100 or whatever gap you want to do, and it's not based off of your actual habits, that's when you're going to feel the tightness. That's when you're going to be like, oh, I'm like preventing myself from eating out. I'm preventing myself from doing certain things because you just arbitrarily are like slashing your budget without actually saying, hey, this is how much I'm spending. What's like a realistic way to take this down, but also like makes it like very manageable for you.
That's so true, Michelle. And I know in the past when I've been more strict about budgeting, like a lot of times you'll get to that last week of the month and you're like, oh crap, ramen noodles all day for this week because I already spent the grocery category. It does help hold you accountable. And if you're starting that budget and you're trying to find ways to bring down your expenses outside of tracking your spending and seeing what you're actually spending on, some big things are routines. When we don't have a routine, it's so easy to overspend. If you're not meal planning, if you're just like, oh, it's 12 o'clock, it's lunchtime, what am I going to eat? That's how you end up spending a lot of money for sure. Or if you don't have a plan for how often you're going to hang out with your friends, next thing you know, you're out every night of the week and you didn't even want to do that. And you're spending now a crap ton of money on going out to eat. That can be how things get expensive quick. So just having that routine or creating routines can help lower your budget.
I agree, Sammie. If I don't cook on Sunday, I find that I'll buy food every single day that week. And knowing those little habits of mine can help me prepare a little bit more. Another big one for me is oops, I don't have gas and now I desperately need gas. So I'll go to the most expensive place because I don't have any options. And now I'm overspending on something like that. I do think it's helpful to have routines built around your budgeting goals because like you said, you're setting yourself up for success versus trying to arbitrarily make cuts and then you're freaking out because you didn't cook, you're spending a ton of money on eating out, but you also just didn't think about it ahead of time.
So true, Michelle. And I think a big one is setting that time and space for you to review your spending, track your spending, and also to budget. Whether that's once every 2 weeks or once a month. If you're doing it less frequently than once a month, it's probably going to be difficult to regulate yourself to some degree. So I recommend at least once a month, checking in with yourself. Make it fun. Every time you do your finances, maybe you make yourself a little lavender latte or you go to Starbucks to do it. Make it like a little romantic date with yourself or your partner whenever you're doing that budgeting because it's such an investment in your future.
I agree, Sammie. Speaking of lavender lattes, I think that comes to another tip that I think is important too. Is a lot of times, this is heavily criticized now, but there is a concept of cutting down your lattes, your small spending to save money for the future. And I think what happens when you're budgeting and what actually makes your budgeting even more effective is that you start to really see that it's the rent, the car payment, these big budget expenses that are the things that are the best opportunities to save money. You can get yourself that lavender latte, treat yourself, and start looking for cheaper housing. Start making the goal of paying off your car instead of looking to buy a new expensive one. For me, this always happens where I'll be like, ooh, am I eating out a lot? Am I spending a ton of money on gas? Am I spending a ton of money on these little things? And then I'll look and it's like my healthcare bill or my car payments that are the real thing that's taking out a chunk of my money.
It's so true, Michelle. And speaking of things that are dumb, just kidding. Speaking of things that we think are dumb, but other people might be okay with, but this is our podcast, so we're going to say it.
We don't think it's dumb. We wouldn't advise doing it this way, but
it is these set savings recommendations. For example, some people say, save 10% of your income. To everybody, they just say that. From when you're working your first job to when you're getting paid the buku bucks, save 10% of your income. No. Once you start making more and more money, you want to be saving more and more money too.
I agree, Sammie. I've noticed, I think this has been around for a while. I don't actually know where it comes from, but I've seen it a lot online, is the 50-30-20 rule, which is where they recommend that you divide your after-tax income into 3 spending categories, which is 50% for your expenses, 30% for your wants, and 20% for savings or paying off debt. And maybe I don't have a great comprehension of it, but I think that using a blanket percentage like that, I almost feel like you have to be in an ideal income bracket. Not too little and not too much, because what I've seen as my income has fluctuated over the years is that sometimes my expenses do make up a huge percentage of my income, and sometimes my expenses have stayed the same, but my income has gone up. And just because my income has come up doesn't mean I should increase my housing cost, increase my car cost, increase these expenses. Making more money doesn't make my car payment go up. So that's why I don't like the percentage rules, because I think it just makes more sense to find what's a good fit for you.
Exactly, Michelle. That 50-30-20 rule, it kind of implies lifestyle inflation. Even though you're going to be making double in the future, maybe, you're going to still divide up your money the same way. The reason I don't like that is because of the fact that, the more money you save, the more time you'll get back. So If I'm making twice as much tomorrow, I actually hope that I'm maintaining the same amount of spending that I am now because I can save even more money and then I get my time back. I can literally do whatever I want for the rest of my life if I can be diligent. It's like Mr. Money Mustache had described in his article, Shockingly Simple Math. If you were saving 20% of your income, no matter what that income is, you've got 37 working years. How about if your income increases, you save 50%, you save 70%. That way, you get your freedom back.
I totally agree, Sammie. So, takeaways for this episode, Sammie. We highly recommend that you start thinking about a budget. Obviously, we're huge proponents of tracking your spending, and you can use that information to start organizing what your regular bills are, your regularly irregular bills, and then your other costs. Anything else you're spending money on.
Yeah, Michelle. Main recommendation, track your spending and then see what you can budget out in the future. Whether it's saving, money that you're going to save, money that you're going to invest, or money that you know is going to go to different spending categories. And if it makes it easier for you, automate that by automatically putting money into savings accounts directly from your paycheck.
And I want to say that tracking your spending, budgeting, anything with your personal finances, it's always important to have compassion for yourself, to do these things objectively. I think people don't like to face their personal finances because I know when I was afraid to face my personal finances, it was because I was starting to be critical of how I was spending my money. I was judging myself without even knowing where things were going. But when I look at it objectively and I say, hey, I'm spending money on X, Y, Z. These are my goals for cutting my costs. These are places that I feel totally comfortable spending the money on. I feel a lot better. So be kind to yourself when you're doing something like budgeting because it's not meant to beat yourself up. It's just to help you reach your financial goals.
Exactly, Michelle. This is why personal finance is personal because it's going to be different for each person. If you're interested, try out things like YNAB, the budgeting app. It is down to the details. So if you think that's not going to be something that's, on your wavelength, then maybe not for you. But if you're really anal and you really want to take your budget by the horns, I think it's like a great tool to organize your budget. And remember, the goal of this, it's to get those ancient dollars. This is a term that's actually used by YNAB. They say that each of our dollars has an age. So, when we're spending our entire paycheck, all of our money is very young, maybe 1 month, 2 weeks old, because we take that money, we use that money to spend it, to pay rent and do different things. But over time, as we become better with our budget, as we become better at wealth building, our little dollars can become old dollars. So we can save $1 today and put it into a savings account or put it into an investing account. And then 1 year from now, that dollar is 365 days old. We want our little dollars to be old. You always hear about little old money, new money. And Michelle and I used to always say we new money. And you know what? Maybe we are. But we want our dollars to age so that we can have those old dollars so that we can pass that on in the future as well.
Absolutely, Sammie. There are so many great templates out there as well, like you said, YNAB, different apps. Let us know if you try any. There's also great templates online, spreadsheets, things like that that you can just Google and download. Or just open up a Google spreadsheet or an Excel spreadsheet and try to bang one out yourself. Whatever you decide to do, we support you. Let us know if you do try budgeting, if you budget now, if there's anything that we missed that you like to keep track of. As always, you can send us an Instagram at statusbostadulting, email statusbostadulting@gmail.com. You can find show notes for anything that we reference in your podcast platform, or if they don't have it for some reason, we also share our show notes on our website, statusbostadulting.com. We're getting some new ones in, so we'd love to send you some to share with your friends. Tag us on Instagram, let us know that you're listening, and let us know for 2022 if there's anything you want us to tackle. We love hearing from you so much.
And most importantly, be sure to join us next time as we put down the rulebook and rethink the status quo.